Welcome to Quarantine Creatives. I'm Heath Racela. So I am loving this show, you guys. I'm loving getting to have a dialogue with you twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays. I'm loving getting to talk to interesting people. When this show started back in May, I thought the quarantine wouldn't last that long, and that was naive, obviously, because here we are several months into it at this point. But I also wasn't sure how long this show would last. I imagined it going maybe 10 episodes if I was lucky. Today's number 18, which is just crazy to me that there are still people that want to talk to me and that I still have questions about sort of where we're headed as entertainers, as artists, as part of this industry. And what's been really cool is just to get to talk to people from all across the entertainment and media landscape. And one area that I know is a blind spot for me is live theater. At this point in my life, I've got 2 little kids and I don't have a chance to go out that much. And when I was younger and I had the time, I didn't have the money to do it. So it's a medium that I love. It's just not something that I get to see all that often. And I'm definitely not hip to sort of who's who in the theater scene. But I was lucky that I got introduced to Leigh Silverman. She is one of the great directors of theater in New York. She's done Broadway. She's done Off-Broadway. She's won 2 Obie Awards. She's a Tony nominee. She's the real deal. And she's one of the few female directors in live theater as well. And so we talk about that. And we talk just about sort of what the future is. You know, Broadway has been one of the first groups to come out and say, we're not going back to work for a long, long time. They're talking about January 2021 at this point at the earliest. And it sounds really, really sobering just to hear something so far out on the calendar and just realize that there are so many people that decision affects. We think about the actors and the musicians, the directors, but it's all the technical people, lighting and sound and, you know, makeup, hair, costuming, all the ushers. You know, there's a whole industry that is just shut down right now because of coronavirus. And frankly, New York's in pretty good shape. So I think for those of us in other parts of the country that are saying, well, reopening's right around the corner, we're going to get there, especially in the entertainment space, Broadway might be the place to look right now and just say, you know what, maybe this is really going to be a long time before things can be normal again. And obviously Broadway has a very different set of circumstances. The live audience plays into it in a way that it doesn't as much on a TV and film set, but it still just feels a long way away. So I'll tell you, I really enjoyed talking to Leigh just about the live theater scene and thinking about that world because, again, it's one that has fascinated me, but it's not one that I know intimately. And I did some live theater growing up. I went to a drama camp one summer and did a couple of school plays and things like that. But just as I matured in my career, I gravitated more towards television. But there is a piece of live theater that I love. And I was reminded of that talking to Leigh. We talk a little bit about Hamilton that's streaming now on Disney+. And I remember seeing the buzz around July 4th when that started streaming and just everybody on Twitter going nuts about how great it was. I didn't get a chance to see it live when it was on Broadway. So this viewing on Disney+ would have been my first time watching it. And I really wanted to enjoy it. I really wanted to have time to sit down and just watch it all in one sitting as close to the live theater experience as I could get in my own home. So we're lucky. My mother-in-law lives about 5 minutes away, and she has been sort of in our same quarantine bubble from the very beginning. Since March, we've gone to her house, she's come to our house, and we've just sort of decided that even though we're 2 separate households, we're going to sort of quarantine together across that 5-minute distance. And so she took our kids for a sleepover this weekend, and my wife and I watched Hamilton because it's funny. Our house isn't that big. And so when the kids go to bed, we can't really put on the TV without disturbing them, or certainly can't watch it with any sort of volume. So my wife and I often will just watch TV, quote unquote, in bed, which is an iPad, and we each share one AirPod. And I didn't want to experience Hamilton that way. I didn't want to watch it on a tiny iPad with AirPods. I wanted to see it as big as I could and as loud as I could. So my mother-in-law was gracious enough to take the kids, and we watched Hamilton. And it moved me. And it did, I think, all the things that theater is supposed to do. It gave me a lot of empathy. It made me think a lot. It reframed how I saw the history lessons that I had been taught all through my school. And it made me want to dig in and learn more and figure out if the stories that I had been fed all along, just how sanitized they were or how romanticized they were, or what narrative they were trying to push. And what's the real truth? And if you viewed history through a critical lens, what would that really look like? So anyways, you'll hear me mention to Leigh that I hadn't seen Hamilton yet. Obviously, I talked to her before I saw it. Now I'm telling you I saw it, and I loved it. And I can't wait to see live theater again. It's been a long time since I've seen a show live, and I miss it. Leigh Silverman actually came to me through the Mrs. Maisel world. If you listened last week, you know that The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is one of my favorite shows, and I talked to Michael Zegan and Maren Hinkle, two of the stars of that show. So Leigh actually directed this music video that you may have seen. It's been kind of going around virally. If you haven't seen it, go check it out on YouTube. It's phenomenal. A majority of this video was shot from home with actors and dancers and musicians all recording their parts from home and Leigh directing them over the phone. It's basically a video that shows the music that Shy Baldwin, one of the characters in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, performs throughout season 3 of the series, and it was a video that's done as a 4-year consideration for the Emmy Awards, the goal being to try to get some of those songs nominated and potentially even win Best Original Song. So Leigh worked very closely with all the talented craftspeople that make Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, the editors, the wardrobe, and made a video that really captures the essence of the show, but was done under quarantine. So that's where the Quarantine Creatives tie comes in, and that's where the Maisel tie comes in. But for me as a TV director, having a chance to talk to a theater director was really exciting too. So here it is, my conversation with Leigh Silverman. Hi, Leigh. How are you?
Hi, Heath. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How have the last 4 months been treating you?
Oh, I mean, amazing. What could be wrong?
Just a global pandemic, and civil unrest.
Sure. The full evaporation of my profession, pretty much.
Yeah.
It's been a rough few months, but it's I think we're all trying to find a way through it, and actually to hopefully be in a better, more just world on the other side.
Yeah. That is sort of the silver lining in all this, is it does feel like I hope anyways, that there are some big structural changes coming to our society, absent the pandemic. That feels like a whole separate issue, but just sort of a more, equitable, fair, just place to live. Like that's the world I want to live in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, what's the point of coming back,
Right.
unless we're able to really make change happen. But there's a lot of deep systemic problems, that I think we're really reckoning with. I mean, as a country, as a people, as citizens, as artists, I mean, it's a very deep, difficult time.
Yeah.
It's really something, on top of just generally being afraid of being sick.
Right. And it just sort of makes you realize the fragility of all this, that like you grow up sort of thinking that everything is a certain way and there's a certain permanence to everything and a certain structure to it. And then, it can take something as simple as a little virus to just kind of wipe that all out.
Yeah, certainly I've felt like, we could only fall so far. But it turns out, I think that we actually had no idea how far we could go.
Yeah.
And how much could possibly implode. And it may still be that we're not even there yet in
Right.
terms of the full implosion.
Yeah.
It's such a mix of weird hope and like catastrophic pain or something. I don't know. It's very interesting. All right, where are you?
I'm in the Boston area, but like
okay.
suburban, So I went to school at Emerson College in Boston and have lived out here ever since then. So the last, 15, 20 years, something like that. So it's nice, but it's, I feel I'm eager to talk to you because I'm very removed from the theater scene, and it's not, especially now I've got two little kids. So like for the last
Oh,
7, 8 years, like I have had no nightlife at all, let alone,
right.
getting out to see shows and stuff. So, but I actually, my background is I'm a TV director. I directed This Old House, Ask This Old House, a spinoff of This Old House for many years on
Oh,
PBS.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's just interesting sort of that director can mean so many different things, even just within the TV world, but then comparing
Sure.
like film to TV directors and then, stage to film and TV directors. Like, just how do you, when people ask you about your job, like, what do you tell them? How do you explain what you do?
That is a fantastic question. Primarily, the work that I do is on new plays and on world premieres. So I work very, very closely with playwrights to shape and bring world premiere production to life. And that frequently means being deep in development with the writer as they're writing and shaping the material, translating that vision to a design team, communicating that vision to a company of actors, frequently adjusting every second along the way, the script and the design, and then ultimately to take all of that and like be a conduit for an audience to understand it, to have it be legible, theatrical, exciting, unexpected, and give real voice to either underrepresented voices or a story that people haven't heard before, or a story they have heard told in a new way.
Yeah.
So that an audience can walk out feeling like they've had a real experience, and the experience that has been kind of our North Star, the writer and I, all the way through. So because I do almost entirely new work, my primary collaborator is always with a writer or writers, whether it's on a musical or on a play. So I think it's kind of the same. The job is always the same, but completely different in the sense that every project is its own snowflake.
Sure.
And it's also kind of nothing but problems from the moment you start working on something, and there's a ton of just fixing things as you go along.
That's a big part of directing, right? It's just kind of rolling with the punches and just, okay, what's going to happen today? How do I solve that? How do I, get us to the next piece of this? How early are you collaborating with the writer? I mean, like, do they have a script at that point? Or are you coming in like as they're starting to sort of form the script?
It's really different with every project. And sometimes with even some writers who I've worked with multiples of times, even within their body of work that we've done together, it's like sometimes the script is sort of it's a fully baked cake when I get it. And sometimes it's like, oh, I have this idea. Can I pitch it to you? Here's what I think should happen. Here's an outline. Here's the first sentence, that kind of thing. And then, frequently in those kinds of situations, I'll work with them over many years to bring that play into existence. And it's really a kind of leap of faith, I think, for both of us in terms of being able to not only get the thing sort of written, but get it to a place where it's produced and enticing for theaters to produce it. And also that there's the development part of it, the process part of it is a very big part of kind of getting a new play onto the stage.
Yeah.
And can sometimes take years.
Sure. And during that collaboration, like what are you adding to it? Just sort of helping the writer sort of figure out visually what's going to be compelling and sort of how to make it more captivating, or like what? Yeah. What's your role in that?
Sometimes it's like, a writer will say, here, I wrote this scene, and I'll read it and I'll say, oh, what were you hoping that the scene was doing? And they say like, oh, well, I'm just feeling like it's this really dark take on X, Y, and Z. And I'll say, oh, that's really interesting. I thought this. Or, frequently what my job is to hold a mirror up to the writing. And sometimes that's through conversation. Sometimes that's through using, being in a rehearsal process and having the actors act something out. And I'll say like, this isn't working. Is it the direction? Is it the ground plan? Is the kitchen sink in the wrong place? Is it, if we're on stage, is the lighting too bright? Is it too dark? Are they wearing the wrong costume? It's sort of up to me to figure out what it is, or to say like, the writing isn't, doing its job here. We need to communicate it in a different way. I think that working with writers and really being able to dig into the dramaturgy of what their vision is, and then how to best put it on on paper, and different writers want a different amount of input. And sometimes writers will want you to really work with them as more as an editor. And sometimes they're like, I really want to write this story. I don't know how to do it. Here's a bunch of attempts, where is the play in here?
Right.
Again, it's like every project is a little bit different. And because really I like working on new work so much that those questions are a really big part of that collaboration is a really big part of why I direct theater, is because I really enjoy maybe in a kind of masochistic way, the kind of sense of the unknown and the birthing of that new thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting sort of when it starts taking on a life of its own, right? Like there's a moment where you're very much almost parenting this project and kind of, willing it into being. And then all of a sudden it grows legs and it starts walking. And some of those questions you wrestle with, it reveals itself in ways that you probably don't expect early in the process, right?
Yes, exactly. And with musicals, it's, you have even more moving parts and different things that could be working or not working. Of course, you never really know what you have until you put it in front of an audience and you start to get feedback. You feel people energetically leaning forward, leaning back. And it really is, it's really the difference between TV and film and theater in that way, because you have a kind of, the process by which plays really get made ultimately happen in front of an audience with the audience feedback. And so the trick is how to really put it in front of an audience before you're ready, so that you can learn what you need to know before you put it in front of an audience, when you're more ready. And how are you ever ready? And a frequent collaborator of mine, David Henry Wong, always says he never actually finishes a play. It just opens.
Right.
And, and I do think that is part of a rigorous process, is that you keep sort of working and working and working on something, kind of until the moment where they are toasting you at your opening night.
Right. Well, it's funny too, because like with a film or a TV show, like you make this thing and you put it out there, and sort of once it's out there, it's like an email. Like you can't unsend it, it's just, it's out there as is. And like with a film, it could live on for 100 years after that. With a play, it's kind of a constant dialogue, right? Like you can tweak every single performance or based on, the mood or energy of the audience on any given day, right? The performers and everyone else can kind of pick up on that and modulate a little bit, right?
Yeah, well, it's a living thing, so it changes, a little bit all the time. Although I would actually say that movies can live on forever, whereas theater is very ephemeral.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to capture the experience of being in the theater. I think, there's examples of people who have tried, and sometimes it works out better than others, but it's very hard to capture an experience that's designed to be felt by multiples of bodies at the same time, and where the intention behind the whole event is to have a kind of group communal experience of some sort, and it's calibrated for that kind of experience, to then capture it on film and to keep it. It's sort of meant to be a happening. It's by design a thing that happened on that night and that night only. It's why it feels so exciting when the lights go down. Because even if it's a long running show, that Tuesday night that you're sitting in the theater where that thing happened in that way.
Yeah. It does. It changes. I wonder, just sort of Hamilton came out on Disney Plus this week and has been sort of all the talk online. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet. Have you had a chance to see the film version of it?
I have seen it, yes.
Yeah. So what's your take on? So I've heard a lot of people saying like we should do more of this. There's plays should be more accessible. People should film more theater. Like, what was your take on Hamilton, and what's your take on that concept generally?
I feel like there's a lot. There was quite a bit of effort that went into that capture of that show, and certainly it was done beautifully, and I think is quite remarkable. I think the National Theatre in London at the NTI Live, they do similar things. The Met Opera has done, similar really incredible captures of some opera, and I think that accessibility is exciting to me. And when I think about, what is a positive upside to this time where people are at home and when there is no theater, it is hopefully the idea of doing some kind of capture for theater in the future, some sort of further accessibility so that it can be. I mean, right now you can watch, plays that we're streaming in other parts of the country and other parts of the world, things you never would have had a chance to see, because it was never a thing that people would put theater online. And I do think that that's an incredible kind of upside to this moment. I mean, the public put a show, a Richard Nelson play, the Apple Plays, and they did it as a Zoom reading, and 17,000 people watched on the first night.
Wow.
And, you just think like it at the Public Theater in New York, in a theater that holds 100, 200 people, even if the show extended, it wouldn't have 17,000 people in the whole run.
Right.
And so that kind of accessibility is truly like an upside to this moment. And certainly people loving the Hamilton stream, that's a real upside. People remembering how much they love theater, that's a real upside.
Yeah.
But I don't think it takes away from the experience of being in a room with other bodies. And I don't know that there's really a way to capture that. I think that for the moment, part of what feels so incredible about that capture is that there's a tremendous amount of skill that Tommy, the director, had in making it feel as close to a live experience as possible. And I also feel like we're hungry for that, like we're nostalgic for that feeling.
Yeah. And as you say, it's not going to replace that. And in some ways, it feels like it's something that will whet people's appetite more. That just like, oh, I've got to see this in person, or I got to go see some local theater, it's not a replacement. It's not, either or. It's hopefully an and.
Hopefully, yeah.
I want to just sort of talk about your beginnings in theater too, because I read an interesting thing that one of your first jobs was as a PA on the touring company for Rent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was like a formative thing for me. I grew up in Cleveland, so like there was very little theater, but I think I went in 5th grade and again in maybe 7th or 8th grade twice to see Rent. And being from a very just kind of homogenous white bread suburb without, a lot of diversity racially, sexually, in so many ways, just to sort of see such a diverse cast and so many different people represented was really eye-opening for me. This is like 10, 11 years old, but just that experience definitely stuck with me, and it sort of lit an interest that, when I'm in New York, like I try to see shows when I can, or, we've got the theater game in Boston has been stepped up tremendously in, the last 10 years or so. They've really renovated a bunch of theaters and stuff. But like for you, I guess, starting on Rent, like what did you take away from that experience?
Oh, that's such a good question. I mean, I was such a theater nerd my whole life, and did theater when I was a kid, and I had gone to Carnegie Mellon for a pre-college program and then was admitted into their directing program. So I started kind of my senior year of high school knowing I was going to a drama conservatory. While I was there, I had the opportunity I was an undergrad theater director, but I was also a graduate playwright. So I had really devoted those years that I was in college to doing literally nothing but theater. I worked on like 57 shows in 4 years or something.
Wow.
I mean, I was just like, get me to New York. Like I was one of those people who it's always been my thing. And I had interviewed at the New York Theater Workshop in, I guess, the fall of '95 for to be an intern for the following summer after I graduated from college. And I had picked the New York Theater Workshop because they were one of the few theaters that I kind of knew about that really like focused on new work and seemed to be doing all these really, really cool plays. And I was just like so excited to go to their offices and interview. And when I went for my, big interview to be an intern, they were working on Rent, and I was really excited about it. And I went back and had finished my senior year of college when the show opened and was running at New York Theater Workshop. And so by the time I graduated college and moved to New York and was an intern, which basically meant I was sitting at the front answering the phones,
right.
Rent had already opened, run at New York Theater Workshop, and had moved to Broadway. And during I think my first or second week of being an intern there, won the Tony. So it was a very exciting time. And I was very lucky to have been in that place at that time. And it was from there that that I became involved in being a PA on the first national tour. And we rehearsed in New York and then actually opened in Boston.
Oh, cool.
And that's where the first part of the tour had been. And I have to say that it was a show that I saw so many times. I mean, I saw it so many times,
Right.
and I was so moved by the storytelling.
Yeah.
And that show, like many shows that have changed, I mean, Hamilton is another example that has changed the form. It is the reason why there's nothing like theater. I mean, it's like those shows that show you a world that you had no idea was out there and yet feels like your world.
Yeah. Like
that is the incredible intersection of like I think a great piece of art in general, but in particular, a great piece of theater. And I had that when I saw one of my first shows, which was Lily Tomlin's one-person show, Signs of Intelligent Life. And I saw Lily Tomlin do that show, and I was like, I had no idea that's what theater could do. That's what language could do. That's what acting was. I mean, it was like, I think I was 10 or 11 years old, and I was sitting way up in high seats up at the Kennedy Center, and she was on a tour, and that was it. I was like, this means like it's changing the shape of my brain while I'm watching it. And I think that's the experience that we have when we see something that is simultaneously blowing our mind with its uniqueness while feeling like it is literally inside of our own hearts and we didn't even know.
Right.
And it's so thrilling when that happened. And Rent was a perfect example of that. And it was being able to be in the right place in the right time at that moment was a really lucky thing for me in my career, and many years of my early life I spent at New York Theater Workshop being, I answered the phones, I was in the box office, I did telemarketing, I worked backstage, and I really learned so much from my time there. And they were a very, very big part of many of the artists that I have come to be, my closest collaborators.
Yeah. It's funny just thinking of, so I don't mean to dwell on Rent so much, but just one little anecdote that it came to my head the other day. And I mean, this is 25 years ago. Like it was something that I'd completely forgotten, but I remember after seeing the show coming in, like I bought the sweatshirt or the t-shirt or, some souvenir. This is the second time I saw it. It must've been in 8th grade. And I remember one of my teachers had also seen it the same weekend and was just like disgusted that like I was wearing the shirt. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she was this very homophobic lady that was very conservative and was just like, I don't want to go see men kiss each other. And I was like defending it as an 8th grader, just like, no, you missed the whole point, lady. Like this is about like love is universal. It doesn't matter what for, like, how could you miss that? And again, just to open my eyes to that I don't know that without feeling that empathy, without, just being exposed to this world, as you say, that felt very familiar, but wasn't my world, that I would have necessarily, gone to bat in that way at that early age. But, it's important to have that conversation, I think.
Yeah, totally. I love that.
Yeah. And so then for you, like moving on to getting into directing and stuff, like what was that career arc for you?
I mean, thankfully somebody told me that I was a terrible actor and that was really it. And actually I had the really good fortune of being told that I was a terrible actor when I was young. So that was good.
Yeah.
And also humiliating, of course. But then the person who said that to me said, you're really smart. You talk about plays really, really well, and you should think about directing. It's so funny to think about this now because I was like 15 years old when that happened.
Yeah.
And I really have staked my whole life on what that person said to me for really no good reason, except that I was like, yes, I'm a director. And, and that was it. And I really was so grateful because at that time, this woman handed me Chekhov and Ibsen and Shaw and so many incredible plays. And I really started to think about that there was another way forward. And also I grew up in Washington, D.C., and there was Arena Stage, which was run by Zelda Fitchhandler. And so I also had the luck of, although we didn't go to Arena Stage, but I knew that it was run by this woman who was essentially the mother of regional theater, who really started the movement at the time. And there was an example of a woman who directed and who ran a theater, and that she was in my consciousness as a person. And so I knew that that was possible. And it was startling to me as I got older and went to college, how I realized that was actually a total anomaly. And in 2006, I directed my first Broadway play, and I was only the 7th woman to ever direct a straight play on Broadway.
Wow.
And that's a terrible statistic. And it's, of course, things have changed to some extent since 2006, but not all that much. And it's really, I think, probably similar to the film and TV world. It's actually quite unusual to have women, and even more unusual to have people of color circling around any of the projects that have a lot of money attached.
Yeah.
And so you might find that there's more gender parity in the smaller theaters, off-Broadway and regionally, but when you get closer to Broadway, there's just fewer and fewer women. And it was really, really a shock to me to start to realize just how, in a way, how backwards the theater was, given that it's sort of people who make theater feel that it's a very progressive place.
Right.
And, I think that it's one of the things actually that the theater community is really reckoning with right now, which is that many people who have benefited from it being a kind of fantasy of a progressive place are now having to reckon with what would it really look like if it was really a place of progress, if it was really a place of inclusion, and if there was room for everyone, or at least more people and more voices at the table.
I think we're all learning that it has to be a conscious choice. You can be blinded by your own biases without even being aware of them, and you sort of have to say, okay, what can I do to get more women at the table, to get more people of color, to get more alternative voices? You sort of have to seek that out and check yourself. I think it as you say, just the momentum of sort of the machinery of it all, right? It's not geared to elevate those voices in the way it should.
Yes. And I think it's really only news to people who haven't had to think about that.
Yeah. Right.
And I think it has been for sure the way until this moment, and hopefully this time will lead to a much deeper systemic change in the way that people are invited into the theater.
Yeah. Well, you talk about your first directing gig in 2006. The lifespan of a fact, that was like 2-3 years ago, something like that, right? And like it was the first all-female design team that you brought in.
Yes. Yes.
Like that feels like in whatever, 2017, 2018, it shouldn't be a headline, but it was. It's sort of what we've been talking about. Like, how do you get better representation into the theater space?
It's such an interesting question, because the thing that I always say is, like, all you have to do to have more women and people of color is hire them.
Yep.
And it's actually not that complicated or hard. I mean, you look at the statistics. So when we did Lifespan of the Fact, it was the first all-female design team. I did not know that it was the first all-female design team. Somebody brought that statistic to me. Yeah. I didn't realize it was news. It's sort of shocking and terrible that is news. In 2010, there was only one Black director on Broadway, but also in 2020, there was only one Black director on Broadway.
Wow. So,
there's a way in which the environment has changed, but it hasn't changed. It's changed for some, but not everybody. We need to be, if theater wants to be a place of progress and a place of inclusion, it has to be that way on all levels, including at the highest level on Broadway. And I think, as another example, this season I directed a play called Grand Horizons, written by Bess Wall. She was the only female playwright on Broadway this season.
Wow.
Now, of course, the season was short, but even if the season hadn't been cut short, she would have still been the only female writer on Broadway this season. Really? Like, we can't do better than that? So I think that we have a long way to go.
Yeah. Well, and you've been pushing for that and fighting for that.
I have,
and that's
yes.
That's a big important thing, I think, to have an advocate that's bringing this to people's attention. I do want to talk about another project that you've done kind of during this quarantine time, and that's this video you directed for the Marvelous Mrs Maisel, which was all it's a for your consideration video for the Emmys for their best original songs. The music that Shai Baldwin sings in the third season. I guess first of all, how did you get sort of attached to that project?
That whole video is such an incredible example of just sort of saying yes to something and you don't really know what it is.
Yeah.
It was truly developing in real time as we were working on it. And I know Amy Sherman Palladino and Dan Palladino. They were producers on a musical I directed called Bailout with Sutton Foster that we did on Broadway in 2014, 2015. And they are just unbelievable, remarkable human beings, artists, friends. And I have spent some time shadowing them on the Maisel set and just being a friend around. And I just think it's such an extraordinary show.
Yeah.
And weirdly, this job did not come to me through them. It was another producer from Amazon had called and said that they were looking to shoot this video, that it was going to include some elements that had to do with a kind of like capture. They weren't really sure what it was going to be. There were going to be singers and dancers and actors involved, but they weren't really sure. And would I be interested? And of course, I said I have no idea, but sounds great. And what was kind of amazing about it was that nobody really knew what was possible. And so in a way, Amy and Dan waited to really write the script for it until we had done sort of beta tests with a few of the dancers and the singers and Darius. And we got a sense of what the inside of Ryan Farrell, who plays Bry Adler, what his apartment looked like, and could we decorate it? And the whole process was so strange and was so incredible because everyone was working in ways that they've never worked before. It was at the height of the pandemic. We had dancers all over the country that were sent backdrops and white backdrops to dance in front of. They were sent essentially proof of concept videos for them to replicate with exactly how to shoot themselves.
Right.
The musicians, same thing. They were sent kind of proof of concept videos of how to shoot themselves wide and close and closer still. All of their videos were uploaded to a Dropbox. Many people were places that it took, 24 hours to upload all their various videos.
Wow.
It was such a crazy endeavor. Then we had the three singers, the three women and Darius, and they were all in separate places. They were all sent costumes. We would Zoom with them to check their camera angles. It required them sort of setting up one device in one place that we were all on, and then they would capture it on a different device. They would have to take their iPhone or their iPad off of a stand, hold it up to their computer to show us how things looked.
Wow.
We would make adjustments. We would zoom in with the costume designer to check on how they looked. The music supervisor was there to make sure that they were how it all sounded. It was such a crazy process. Then they had to film themselves close and in wide shots in all their various costumes. They had no idea how we were going to put it all together. We didn't know how we were going to put it all together. We had two sort of big shooting days at Ryan's apartment where he and his wife were just unbelievably generous with us, letting crew people come in. They were masked and had gloves. They rearranged all of their furniture. I watched over Zoom for 8 hours on one day as we picked and set up the scenery. But of course, I'm just standing in my apartment, peering into my computer, trying to place scenery. I can't see anything in 3D. It looks totally crazy. There was a remote control camera that we left in his apartment. We sent him and his wife costumes, and then they had to mic themselves, do their own hair and makeup, zoom in with the costume designer. It was a really wild night of shooting because they were just alone in their apartment with crew hovering outside. Anytime something needed to be adjusted with the camera, Ryan and Katie would have to go into their bedroom, close the door. The guys would come in, adjust the camera, go back. They couldn't occupy the same space at the same time. It was just unbelievably wild. And then I directed Ryan over the phone. He couldn't see me.
Oh, wow.
Because we could see him, but he could not see us. So he was just sort of acting in a void in his apartment. And then he would pick up his phone, which was just out of camera, and listen to me give him some direction. He would have to slate himself. He was such a sport. I can't say enough about what he and his wife did. And sometimes his wife, Katie, would hold the phone and say what I was saying over the phone to him, to try not to break his concentration so he wouldn't have to lean down and pick up the phone. There was a shot that she was in, and in that case, the phone had to come down, and then they'd have to just do it and then pick back up the phone and listen together. I was so deeply absorbed in their life and their apartment and what was happening to them, but they wouldn't recognize me if they were sitting next to me right now. Funny. Because they never saw me. And we shot those interstitial scenes over the course of a single night. It took about, 5.5, 6 hours. And then they went back into their bedroom, and then the camera guys came back in. They took the camera away. And then the next day, their whole apartment was deassembled, and then everything was moved back into its place. I mean, it's just a wild, wild story. And then the incredible editors and video effects people from Maisel, everybody just got together, and we looked at all the uploaded footage and started to come up with an idea about how to treat all of this quarantine footage. And of course, Amy, who has the highest standards of anybody, which is why she's such a genius, was like, I don't want it can't look like we did it during quarantine.
Right.
It just has to look better than everything that anyone has ever seen. So of course it was like no pressure. And then, and then we just set about to figure out how to showcase that incredible, incredible music. And I mean, speaking of Rent, it's really full circle because Darius DeHaas is an original cast member of Rent.
Oh, wow.
And so it was such a treat to be able to really, I think of the videos, I mean, it is truly like a love letter to Darius. He's so talented, and those songs are so incredible, and he's showcased so well. And I just really, I mean, talk about the level of trust those actors, singers, dancers, and musicians all had to have, that they were just, it's so vulnerable to film yourself, to be your own gaff, your own lighting person, to make yourself look, it's just all the things that that are usually taken care of by other people on a set. And it was just a total adventure and labor of love and such faith that they all had that it would sort of look okay in the end.
Right.
So.
With your background in theater, had you done a lot of TV work, or was this a new world for you as well?
I've shot a couple of short films, but
okay.
I had never directed TV, and it was really wild. Actually, one of the producers, after we did the shoot with Ryan, he said that was one of the hardest TV shoots, and I was like, it was my first, and he was like, well, that was really a way to start out.
Well, it came together beautifully, and like you said, just it features the music so nicely, and there's something just about everything about that show is just magical. Just the way it's shot, the acting, the wardrobe. Like it's one of my favorites. So
I agree. It's so incredible, and I just think it's so. I mean, you look at the way that the way the show is put together is so extraordinary, and it's so unique, and it's just, I love watching it. I really do.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Going back to theater for a minute, I think it's early 2021 now they're talking about for Broadway reopening, right? Like they've completely counted out 2020. What do you think?
Completely, yes.
Yeah. What do you think the reopening will look like?
Well, it's really hard to say. I mean, I think it's not going to be like turn the lights back on and, here we all are.
Yeah, fill the house again.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a slow rollout, and I think it's going to be messy and chaotic. I mean, I think the theater community, like everybody, is struggling to figure out, there's a few people like with, I'm sure, everybody's local restaurants or stores. It's like they're the few brave people and the people who are like, we're willing to be the guinea pig. We're willing to be the first ones. We want to get open. We're going to see how it goes. And then there are the other shows that will hang back. And I think that there's quite a bit of discussion going on right now about not only safety for the audience, but safety for actors backstage. I mean, there's no theater in New York that has a dressing room where you can socially distance.
Right.
So, usually it's, 5 people, 6 people to a dressing room, and a chorus of, at a musical more. So I think that where people are going to be able to be backstage, how they're going to be able to be around each other, sing, rehearse. I mean, I think that all of those safety issues are very, very important. And we had a lot of people in our community who are very sick, and people are scared, and also they really want to get back to work. Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of really smart people who are really thinking very closely about what that looks like and how that will happen. And of course, everyone wants it to be soon. And also everyone is quite nervous about the ability to really do it and do it safely. So, right now we have a number of theaters in this country that are open in socially distanced ways, that have outside theater, and we'll see how that goes. I mean, it just feels like every week, every 2 weeks, things change anyway. It certainly seemed like a couple months ago, it seemed like, oh yeah, LA will definitely be open first, and now LA is shut back down. So it's really hard to know. I mean, it never seemed possible that New York would be the safest place to be in the country, and right now it is.
Right.
So I think that we don't know, and it's very hard when you think about businesses sort of expanding and contracting again, opening, closing. You just can't do that with a film shoot or a TV shoot or theater. I mean, you just can't close down for 2 weeks while people quarantine. So it's going to be very hard to know really how to move forward, certainly until there's a vaccine, but really until we have a way of really dealing with it. And then I think if people know that they can get better, that they can get medicine, it will be okay, and people will be, I think, more likely to be willing to go to work again. But and not until there's a sense that there's, I don't know, something to take that would make sure that you don't.
Yeah. And it's such a tough balancing act right now, I think, of like wanting to work for economic reasons, but not necessarily wanting to for safety reasons, and trying to figure out, at what point do those scales tip in a different direction. And hopefully, as a society, we think about how we keep it from, the people that want to stay home and stay safe. We figure out, unemployment or some sort of stipend or, something that just, people don't have to go out and expose themselves to this. But
I mean, the UK just gave $2 billion to the arts. It's like, where's our arts bailout? I mean, I think this is one of the things that we're really struggling with as a community, is who can stick with it long enough. How will people survive? And it's a very, very scary time. I think we're already losing artists in this moment, not just because of people being sick, but people not being able to afford living in New York. And, there's just going to be a real deep move away from people being able to do theater and film and television and the arts in general, because they're not going to be able to stick it out.
Yeah. But they're so vital. I mean, that's this is what the whole conversation's been about, is just how art can move you and change you and give you empathy. And, we got to find a way to, it's not you and I, someone, society, we've all got to figure it out. But theater's a piece of it for sure.
For sure. And, we have a lot going on right now in this country that needs to be digested and reflected back to us through the arts. And, we need writers and thinkers and makers of all kinds of different art to help us digest and understand who we are on the other side of this. And, we can't do that if we don't offer support and sustenance for the arts community during this time.
All right, Leigh Silverman. She was great. And she's so right. We need art more than ever now. And it really makes me think just about how we've devalued art in this society. Carl Reiner died at the end of June. And I remember hearing the story about how he got into acting. it was because of Roosevelt's Works Progress Administration. The WPA was offering drama classes. And so he went to drama school, paid for by the U.S. government. And just think about all of the joy that he brought to people over his life, right? The Dick Van Dyke Show and The Jerk and Rob Reiner's dad. I mean, there's just so much that little investment early on paid off to our whole society. So I hope Leigh's right. I hope artists can help us make sense of this time, and I hope we all realize the importance of that art and support it. Give our money to it, you know? Go see these shows. Go check them out because it's important. Helps us digest who we are. All right, new show on Thursday. Make sure you come back for that. Hit the subscribe button so you'll be the first to know about it. And I'm at Heath Racela on Twitter and Instagram. Leave me a note there. Give me a follow. I'll talk to you guys Thursday. Stay safe.